Hi, also, I think we're about to get started. I see people are still trickling in, but I think this is a good starting point. So I just want to again welcome everyone to our elections training. So a quick background on why we're having these trainings is MuckRock and Sunlight Search have been working together on a new elections project for this election year. And this is really involving a lot of background in candidates using public records, campaign finance records, and being able to make that publicly available to as many people as possible. So part of this research includes submitting record requests to state and federal agencies, pulling property and business records, and kind of doing a lot more deep dives for local records requests. So based on that research, the MuckRock editorial team works on creating original investigative pieces on these candidates. So most recently, we published a story on Republican candidate Margarita Wilkinson in California's 49th district, who is a relative newcomer, and we're going to be using her as an example of how we were able to do some deep backgrounding on a political candidate. So she is a particularly interesting candidate as she was relative newcomer, so there's a lot of information that's not available about her, and that's one of the reasons that we did this. So also just letting you all know, we are making all these records and data available on Document Cloud, and it can be used for newsrooms across the country. So and we'll also be sending out a little tip sheet after the session. You'll probably get it on Monday of kind of top things that we have covered, links, all that. So you'll be able to have that after the session, and the session is being recorded. So will be made available later as well. And also, I also want to mention throughout this project, we do want to hear from people, especially our attendees, anyone who's interested in this work. We do have a form that if you want to collaborate or have any kind of tips on any candidates that we might want to look into, that's something that we encourage. We want to hear from the public about who should be investigated for this election year. So with that, I do want to introduce Brandy Spicegood. She's the executive director of Sunlight Search. She's spent 2 decades reporting, editing stories ranging from politics to immigration to criminal justice, and has previously worked at publications including the Texas Tribune, where she was a founding staffer, the Los Angeles Times, Dallas Morning News, and USA Today. So thank you, Brandy, for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here. And really happy to be working with you guys on this project. So I wanted to share a little bit about Sunlight Search since we're a relatively new startup. So we started late last fall, and our mission really is to do accountability research on candidates for public office. We're inspired by what happened with George Santos and in trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So we are doing these sort of deep dives on political candidates, putting together chronologies of their lives to really make sure that that the public understands who these candidates are before they actually go to the polls. So in our work, we put together everything we can find out through public records and data searches about candidates, everything from, where they were born, the kinds of businesses they've been involved with, where they went to school, their campaign finance data, and really to put together a comprehensive picture of who they are. And then we provide that information to reporters like MuckRock and other organizations who are interested in reporting on these candidates and providing this information to voters. So we're really excited to be working with MuckRock on these candidates, and we are really hopeful to work with more folks on really investigating, doing deep dives into candidates and helping inform voters about who they are before they make important decisions this November.
Great. And talking about our collaboration with MuckRock and Sunlight Search, also, I just want to make a note that there's also Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to leave them in the chat while we're, kind of discussing election research. But Brandy, I kind of wanted to go over what it's like to create a timeline through public records and how we were able to do that excuse me one second. So I just wanted to kind of talk through how we do, timelines and what that can look like.
Sure. So, I guess we could start with the place where we started. We wanted to prove our sort of concept in that this kind of timeline format would work, this chronology format would work. So we put together a chronology of everything that would have been available to be known about George Santos before he ran for office in 2022, before he was elected. And we searched everything from, his business records, his where he went to school, his claims about his ancestors surviving the Holocaust. We put together genealogical information to show that that wouldn't have been that couldn't have been true. We found birth records that indicated when and where his parents were born, so that we could understand, his deep background. And we also found business records that associated him with the Ponzi scheme company that he had been a part of, and then the companies that he started afterward with fellow associates at that Ponzi scam company. And in doing so, we not only put together, sort of this timeline to show how and when the pieces fit together. We also found information about people who reporters could contact to verify the information. So, you'll see here, and in many of the slides, there are these little red people that are listed. And in all cases where we could find associated people, we provided information about them, their contact information where it was available. And in this case, it, is his mother. So we found information about when and where she was born and where she passed away. We were able to get her immigration records. And so finding all of these things really helped us to put together this comprehensive timeline to show, where the pieces overlapped, how he claimed to have worked at all these high profile companies like Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, while at the same time, you can see through public records and court documents that he was being sued for all kinds of debts because he wasn't paying off debts, wasn't paying off credit cards. And we also got his property records that showed he lived in really pretty modest places and wasn't paying rent most of the time where he was living. So it kind of helps to paint a picture of, how you could have seen through the lies that he was telling during his campaign. So this was sort of our proof of concept that, by searching through public records, finding, all these different sorts of documents, you can really get a picture of a full picture of a candidate that goes beyond what they're telling the public. And so then we started, obviously, with MuckRock working on this other candidate, Margarita Wilkinson. And we just wanted to know about her because there simply wasn't that much known in the public about her. She's a brand new candidate. She had never run for public office before, never really been involved in politics. And so we just wanted to really understand her. So we started with, doing some basic searches about, where she'd worked. We did a LexisNexis search to kind of start filling in some of those blanks and putting the pieces together. We pulled stories about her career that she had talked about on her campaign website, just to make sure that, that those claims were accurate. And in most cases, we found out that they were accurate. And I think in a lot of these cases, as we do this research, we're going to find that, I think a lot of candidates will be probably pretty boring. And what we're trying to do really is, hopefully we'll see that George Santos is an anomaly, but, by painting a full picture and really filling in some of the blanks that candidates don't necessarily tell, even if they're not necessarily making up things, I think we can provide a fuller picture of what a candidate looks like. And I think that's what we were able to do in the case of Margarita Wilkinson.
Right. And then could we also just talk back with this, you created this demo of a timeline for George Santos, and also kind of this is also a tool that, newsrooms or reporters can use to kind of create a more visual look at a timeline on their own sites for their own audiences. And maybe we could just go through how we used a Knight Foundation tool for that.
Sure. So this presentation is Timeline.js, and it's really helpful and fairly simple tool to use. And I think what's most helpful about it is that in order to use this tool, you need to put all of your information in a spreadsheet in a timeline fashion. And it really helps to see the pieces come together so that you can see, where different parts of his life sort of overlapped. And I think that's really the value of the timeline. And Timeline.js is available on the Knight Foundation website. It's open source, so anyone could use it. And we really encourage folks, as part of when we train folks to do this research, it's really important to us to keep it in a chronological format. And we really encourage people to do that as they're going through and doing this research. Not only in the end does it make it easier to create a timeline like this that's presentable, but it helps you as you're doing the research to understand where the pieces are missing in this puzzle that you're putting together, and also, to put together connections as they're forming as you do the reporting. It's a really valuable tool.
Okay, great. And then, so when we're looking at someone, as we're using this example of Margarita Wilkinson, when we're looking at red flags, because sometimes like Margarita Wilkinson as a background to all, she's a candidate in the San Diego area, but she is a political novice. She hasn't held office before, and if you Google her prior to this, there is very little about her available, just through Google search. So it kind of begs the question of what do we look for in red flags as we're collecting these records, looking at if we're talking about campaign finance, or if we're looking at just marriage records, property records, business records. What would you kind of consider like red flags or things to look out for when people are trying to report on these individuals?
I'd say more than sort of red flags, what we're looking for is just filling out that puzzle, making sure that the pieces all fit together and that it's a complete picture. And so there were a lot of things we didn't know about Margarita Wilkinson. We knew that she said she had migrated or emigrated from Mexico as a young kid, that she had gone to the University of Texas at El Paso, that she had started working at a TV station and worked her way up through the ranks, and then eventually becoming a vice president of this national Spanish language television network. And so we started just doing, what we would do for any candidate, which was searching for any sort of lawsuits, any sort of marriage records, any sort of property records that we could find. And in doing so, sort of a more complete picture of her life came together. So we found that she had been married in New Mexico, and that she and her husband had gone through, a somewhat sticky divorce. And around that same time, we found there were foreclosure documents that indicated that had been a foreclosure on their very expensive home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in around the same time that they were getting divorced. And through those documents, we were also able to find that she moved from Albuquerque at that time, where she was married and worked at one of the stations there, to San Diego to work because she got a promotion with her company, with the television network. One of the interesting things is we were looking through the foreclosure documents, is it really painted a fuller picture of her financial situation at that time. And so what we could see in the foreclosure documents was that they had applied for a secondary loan on their home, and had to disclose, you know, their assets at the time. And what we could see from that was that she and her soon-to-be ex-husband were nearly $1 million in debt. And by the time this foreclosure sort of settled out, her wages were garnished to the tune of almost $2,000 a month, I believe. Um, and and they were garnished for quite a long time, from 2011 to 2017. Um, and so that was just an interesting picture, because she obviously didn't say anything about that on her campaign website. Um, and then what also became clear is, after she moved to San Diego, she became involved in a relationship with Philip Wilkinson, who was a co-founder of the television network where she was a vice president, and who lived in San Diego. And so we were able to find out that, you know, after this marriage and sort of after her divorce from her first husband, and, you know, all of these financial situations, she married Philip Wilkinson, who was worth, we were able to find out through SEC records and other documents, and her personal financial disclosures, that he is worth some $60 million, if not more. And so, you know, this really interesting transformation in her life, from being you know, really far in, you know, $1 million in debt, having her wages garnished, to now being a pretty wealthy person who is able to basically self-fund her campaign, because she married the founder of the television station where she worked. So it is not that she necessarily, I think, obviously told any huge lies or embellished her resume, or really anything that you would say George Santos did. But what we were able to do here is really provide a clearer picture of her story and her background.
Right. Yeah, and so this is kind of another thing I'm jumping to in terms of what's like publicly available, of how, you know, others can kind of replicate what we've done for Margarita Wilkinson, is, you know, kind of looking at personal financial disclosures, because as we were doing our research for Margarita Wilkinson, there had like I said before, there wasn't a lot of coverage on these people, but she did blow past her, you know, her deadline to submit her personal financial disclosure. And then once we did receive it, this became a big challenge for the MuckRock and the Sunlight Search team, as we kind of wrote on MuckRock for our weekly column. But as you can see here on this screen, this is just a fraction of Margarita Wilkinson's assets, investments, you know, et cetera. All handwritten. So I do want to point this out to someone as talking about challenges and hurdles when we're looking at candidates. And this is when we really had to bring in a lot of experts, and there's a lot of questions based on this, because, you know, when you're looking at campaign finance records, it's not as common that someone with this many assets, or just in general, handwrite their own disclosure. So as you can see, this is a huge challenge, as, you know, a member of the Sunlight Search team has to go line by line and essentially recreate this in a Google sheet, because it is not very legible. It is not very accessible in terms of also transparency. This is not exactly an easy way to do this. And particular for Margarita Wilkinson, which I do think I want to point out to anyone doing their own research, is she is very wealthy. So it's incredibly important to look through line by line, unfortunately, because of all the assets she has, where could that provide complications in the future if she does get elected. So this is something that I find very important, but also I, you know, would like to mention as part of our research, you know, we have to contact Campaign Legal Center, because there can be things that are missing, or as they mentioned to us, you know, first timers oftentimes aren't going to get their personal financial disclosures right the first time, because it's a, you know, it is as a newcomer. However, this is really important to not just get the records, be able to analyze them properly as well. So Brandy, since, your team was, I would say a huge part of this portion of like actually analyzing the documents, if you have anything else to add about, kind of these challenges to backgrounding these candidates.
Yeah, I mean, I think this this particular document was our biggest challenge in this the research on this particular candidate, just because it was so like labor intensive. But I would also say that it was also completely worth it because it allowed us to really get a deeper view of what her assets are. And I think if we hadn't done the work of going through line by line, we wouldn't have found that, she and her husband own a very expensive yacht that they reported as an LLC on this particular document on their disclosure. And we also were able to understand that as we were doing the research on what needs to be reported and what they aren't required to report, we had found that Philip Wilkinson, Margarita's husband, owned at least three pretty high value properties in the San Diego area, one of which was a rental property. And we were unsure whether that was something that needed to be reported on her personal financial disclosure. And so we were able to make a couple of calls to understand that indeed the rental property for sure, because it generates income, should have been reported and was not.
Yeah. And then this is also just like other challenges that we have encountered, just through this investigation, but we're also talking about when we're trying to obtain records in states that require a proxy, or you need someone to actually physically go there to pick them up. If you want to talk about any other kind of complications that you run into when accessing these public records, but records that are kind of crucial to this work.
Right. So this was a case where yeah, I guess choosing California as our candidate in California for one of our first endeavors was setting ourselves up for a challenge because, as some of you may know, the open records laws there are not particularly favorable. So in order to get a lot of these documents, the property deeds that we needed to obtain, and the marriage records, the divorce records that we needed to obtain, we actually had to send someone in person to those offices to pick up the documents because California, their rules are so strict. They don't provide much of anything at all online and require in-person pickups of almost all records. And in fact, there's one record that we still haven't really been able to track down, which we would really like to. And we may not even be able to, and that's kind of shocking to me, is her marriage certificate, because to Philip Wilkinson, because in California, as some of you may know, they people can choose to make their marriage licenses private, and in those cases, it's difficult, if not impossible, to obtain by anyone other than a party to the marriage.
Yeah, and then so also just turning around to what Sunlight Search does and how that kind of differs a little bit to MuckRock is, kind of how are you picking individuals to look at, what are some guidelines that, people may be able to use when they're kind of looking, and there's so many people running in the 2024 election, what some kind of good markers of maybe someone that be worth investigating, or at least backgrounding.
Sure. So we kind of have divided the candidates that we're looking at into basically three kind of buckets. So we're looking at people who seem to have extremist ties or extremist claims, people who are election deniers, sort of people who in one way or another might present a threat to democracy. So that's one bucket, but we're also looking at people going back to sort of our origination and the idea of trying to prevent, future George Santos's, looking at people who exhibit some of the same traits that we saw with George Santos. So folks who seem to have maybe padded their resumes, who may have some financial improprieties in their background. So those kinds of things are making outlandish claims that they can't necessarily back up. And then finally, the other sort of bucket that we're looking at is candidates who are novices, who haven't run for public office before, or even if they have run for public office and maybe even served in public office, if they haven't really been deeply vetted before. So, if there's not much reporting on, their sort of background, both personally and professionally and politically, where are the holes that we can fill in?
Yeah, and I'll also open this up to questions if anyone has any questions about kind of what we've gotten over, or if there's any, individual question about how to background candidates, please let us know. But yeah, so Brandy, like when we're looking at, as something that we've done for our research is also kind of looking at primary dates, trying to see who, because, if we're looking at various seats, there can be so many candidates that may or may not make it to November. So, also how do we kind of keep that in mind and create that, for, a newsroom that maybe has limited resources, how we kind of can prioritize certain candidates or, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges because, we don't want to inadvertently let a candidate who might potentially pose a threat to democracy or be corrupt in some way accidentally slip through the cracks. So we are focused primarily in our work right now on swing district candidates, and we are organizing those races by primary date, looking at the candidates in each of those races to see, who's gotten the most money so far. I think that's a big factor to look at. We are trying not to spend a lot of time and resources on candidates who don't really seem serious, right? Who haven't raised any sort of significant amount of funding or who, um, you know, aren't really posing a serious, um, mounting a serious campaign. And so that just requires a little bit of digging into, doing some looking at what they've posted so far, in terms of their campaign websites, really kind of digging into what they're saying and looking at their campaign funding, up to this point and evaluating whether or not, it's someone that's worth looking into. I would say in California in particular, it's a little bit different because they have the open primary there and it's coming up March 5th. And so the top two candidates of each of those races will come out regardless of party. So that makes that one just a little bit more interesting to kind of try to parse. But I would say and encourage people as they're looking for candidates to invest this kind of time and effort and resources into, just take a little bit of time at the beginning to try to assess whether or not that those candidates have a realistic chance. I think one of the things we've seen in our research so far is that, there are in many of these races candidates who may on the surface seem like they, exhibit extremist tendencies. But if you dig a little bit deeper, they're really it's really important to assess whether they have any actual chance of becoming a nominee. And so, there's a case of a race in Nevada where one particular candidate that we looked at, on her website, there's very pro-gun, very pro-Trump, very, all of the things that sort of scream red flags. But then looking a little deeper, hasn't raised a lot of funding up to this point. Other Republican candidates in that race are doing, better in terms of fundraising than her. So for us, at least, it makes sense to wait until the primary to see who comes out of that race. And that decision is one that may be different for a local reporter. If that particular race were to become, if that primary were to become competitive, that decision might be different for someone local.
Great. And I do think we have a question from Ken, so I'll unmute him and, yeah, Ken, if you have your question, you can answer that.
Yeah, the first question is, I loved your display of the timeline. I was wondering, I didn't catch the name of the tool that you were using, the app or whatever it is. I do a lot of this background research myself already, but I don't have any, I've never just tried to display it in such a nice timeline like you had.
The tool is called Timeline JS, and it's an open source tool that's available on the Knight Foundation website.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ken.
I did have another question. Let me see. I'll put it in the text when I was making notes here, and I got to find it. Shoot, where's the parenthesis? When you said you couldn't find marriage certificates in California, in Texas, fortunately, like in Travis County, where I am in Austin, they are readily available online if they were married locally. But I wondered, had y'all looked for marriage applications, which would give you some indication of when this candidate was married. In Texas, you'd have to get an application from the county clerk, and then you could go and find and have your ceremony and be married, and then you return the completed certificate to the county for recording. So I can get either one. I can get the certificates online myself. But I'm just wondering, had y'all looked for the application that the Wilkinsons had for marriage? That might be available. That's the only reason I mentioned it.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll have to double check that. I don't know if this process is, I used to live in Austin up until about a year ago,
I
got married.
did too, but I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas in September 2021. I'm still reporting on Austin, been doing it for 42 years.
That's awesome. But so I know that process in Texas pretty well, but I need to understand, I guess, if the same process exists in California. That's a good point, and I'll double check that.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank y'all.
Yeah, so I just want to see if there's any other questions, any kind of follow-ups, but I do want to remind everyone I'll be sending like a tip sheet for all of y'all. So, links to everything that you've been seeing today, also to the timeline. So, you'll make sure to get everything for y'all. But I think that's it for questions. So I did want to, thank everyone for coming. Really appreciate you taking the time on a Friday just to go over elections backgrounding. And Brandy, is there anything else that you want to leave the attendees with?
I guess I would just say that we're really excited to work with newsrooms as we do this research. And so, if there's a candidate that you're interested in, please reach out to us. We are happy to help. If you're going along and have any questions, when there's any way we can provide some advice or just bounce ideas off of, we're here to help, and we really want to be here for you as you do this work. That's really important this year.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a very happy Friday.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks. Bye.